Take a look as Israel has now released aerial video showing the incident today in Gaza City. More than 100 people were killed.
انت ليش زعلان؟
اخذ مني الاغراض.
انت رحت تاخذ مساعدات واخذوا منك الاغراض؟ طب وين ابوك عنك؟
مستشفى ابويا.
يعني انت جاي تجيب الاغراض لمين؟
جاي لعائلة اخذ لاخواتي وامي.
ايش انت اخذته وايش اخذوا منك؟
كيس رز وباكيتين بسكوت اخذوهم مني.
ايش بدك؟ احكي لي ايش بدك؟
نفسي تخلص الحرب واشوف وين ابوي راح. بعرف وين اندفن ولا وين راح.
Individuals gathering for the food, and then it seems like just mass chaos unfolded after that.
أحيانا ناكل من ربطة الخبز لا يفنى للمغرب. نرجع ناكل فيها المغرب. هذا دريان فيه.
So just another sad development against this backdrop of the humanitarian suffering.
بدي ماما تطلع شخصية براسها وتطلع عايشة. بديش أكمل حياتي بدون أمي.
When Israel released the aerial footage of what came to be known as the Flower Massacre, little did they know that what they're showing the world is how they view Palestinians, as dots in a video game, ants. Or maybe they know that that's how they see Palestinians and they just don't care. I don't know which is worse actually, but either way, it's clear that Israel doesn't see Palestinians as human beings, much less grieving human beings. You know, when I think of Palestinian grief, especially at a time like this when the trauma is still ongoing, the word unprocessed comes to mind. Unprocessed grief. Grief that is buried so deep down because the mind is so busy trying to survive that it won't allow the grief to come up because it will ruin the chance of you surviving. You know, there are countless of clips that you see of Palestinians who are still in Gaza, whether you see it on Instagram or TikTok. Most of them, when they speak about their suffering, they seem very disconnected from it, from feeling it. Like this one girl who doesn't know if her parents are still alive or not.
لما قلت لأمي بدي أطلع على الجنوب قالت لي روحي وحنلحقك. رحت مع جيراننا بالعمرين. طلعت معاهم إنه على أساس إنه إيش أبويا يلحقني. قعدت يعني كمان أسبوع 3 أيام زي هيك أسبوع. بعت لي رسالة إنه أخويا تاني استشهد. قلت له طب وين أنتوا رحتوا؟ قال لي إنه رحنا عند خالتك في السجاعية. بعد ما قال لي هالكلمة ما عرفتش حاجة عنه. إلي 2.5 شهور. اتندمت إني طلعت من غزة أصلاً. كثير اتندمت. يعني طلعت لحالي من غير لا أخو ولا أخت ولا أم ولا أبو. تعبت كثير.
بالليل لما بتنامي بتحلمي في إشي؟
بضلني هدوس أبويا. بضلني أحلم إن أهلي دارنا مولعة. بحلم بس كيف أقولك بيجيش أهلي فيها. صوت بسمع وجه لا.
Another example of unprocessed Palestinian grief is an interview I saw of a girl from Gaza who's now in the UK, and she was being interviewed on the Palestine pod. And depending on how you look at it, you can see her as lucky or unlucky because she was out of Gaza before October 7 because she's a PhD student in the UK. And then when October 7 happened, she was still there. Now the rest of her family, including her husband, her kids, her parents are still in Gaza and she can't see them. And now she's talking in the interview and she's saying all those harrowing things that are so painful, but the tears that normally would come with such stories are not there. Because she's obviously very worried still about her family. There's so much still for her to do. Meanwhile, one of the co-hosts of the podcast, an American Jewish guy called Michael, he's great, by the way, he was hearing those stories and he started crying.
My sister was sheltering in a hospital. She was there with her husband, 3 kids. One of them was less than month-old. I just attended his delivery a few weeks before I traveled. And they were in the hospital. They had no tent. They had nothing. She and her husband divided the warmth of their bodies between the children. She would take the baby for a while and put him in her lap to make him warm inside her clothes. And then her husband would take the 2 kids, 7 and 9, and put them in his lap and also warm them. And they would exchange that all the night to make sure that their children would be warm. And they have done that for at least 5 days.
You know, for weeks now, I've been trying to find a Palestinian from Gaza to speak to for this video. It looks like they have more important things to do than help me create content, like staying alive. So selfish. They're so anti-Semitic.
Don't joke about that.
No, but seriously, I did find, however, is a different kind of Palestinian to speak to. A Palestinian like me in the diaspora. Another Palestinian who's glued to their phone, watching this horror unfold from a distance.
You don't even have the luxury of grief. And how often do you even think of grief as a luxury? You know, you never see it in this way. But now that we see, there's a mother whose kid died, but the other kid needs her right now. So I don't have time to grieve this one, and I have to rush and help the other one. You know, I've been saying since the beginning of this, that Palestinians have had to make decisions that no human being should be making. Do I leave my baby in the incubator and leave the hospital, or do I stay here and die with the baby? And I thought, of course I would stay here and die with the baby. And then my friends told me, but what if you have 3 other kids? And then you start asking yourself, oh my God, what do I do?
You know, that's grief on top of grief on top of grief, all of it unprocessed, of course. And I'm going to be speaking to Mona throughout this video. And don't worry, this video is still going to feature that ex-Israeli soldier as the thumbnail promised. He's still coming up, and he's here to school the influencers of the world about how he woke up from the indoctrination that made him blind to Palestinian grief and suffering. And speaking of Palestinian suffering, in this video, I'm going to spare you the extremely graphic and painfully graphic examples of suffering. But what I do want to mention is the nearly 20,000 unaccompanied children that are all alone right now, not only orphaned, homeless, hungry, alone. Imagine your child was roaming the streets alone and afraid with no one to help them or feed them. There's nearly 20,000 of those. Who's checking on these people's grief? Who's comforting them? That's what I thought.
For people in the north of Gaza, it's even worse because no food is reaching them anymore. And so my own staff, my own colleague Abir, has been eating animal feed, and horrifyingly, the food that they were eating, which is food for horse and donkeys, is now running out, and now they're eating birdseed.
Once again, who's checking on these people's grief? More importantly, who's causing that grief? Who's facilitating it? Why, it's none other than the most moral army in the world. You're simply the best. Better than all the rest.
Liberal news outlet Haaretz just published a piece for their Hebrew language audience that reaches breathtaking new levels of dehumanization and tone deafness. An incomprehensibly vile article in the style of a lifestyle cooking feature about Israel soldiers finding and cooking with ingredients in the kitchens of Gazans who had to flee their homes and are now starving. Just take a look at this scrumptious dish that the article labels bruschetta a la Gaza.
Do you think cutting off food, water and electricity is within international law?
I think that Israel has an absolute right to defend itself against terrorism.
That's not the question I asked.
It is an answer to the question that you've asked, and I think it's an appropriate one at this time.
The only way you can justify Israel's barbaric treatment of Palestinians is if you can block out the idea that Palestinians suffer. Block out the idea that Palestinians can feel pain like you. You know, to Israel and its supporters, Palestinians are like bearded beasts, barbaric beasts, wrapped in turbans with nothing on their mind but death. To them, a man who looks like this can only be a terrorist. This doesn't happen by accident, it happens by design. Western media is complicit in demonizing Palestinian men and erasing their pain. And later in this video, we're going to get into the specific tricks which mainstream media uses to do exactly that, to erase the pain of Palestinian men. But for now, I would say that Western media views and portrays Palestinian men through a security lens, like they're a constant threat. And speaking of surveillance, one of my interview guests this week, not the lipsync interview, which is still coming up, girl. One of my real interview guests is Australian Jewish journalist Andy Lowenstein, who wrote The Palestine Laboratory on how Israel uses Palestinians as lab rats for testing its technology of surveillance and occupation and exporting it around the world. And when I asked Anthony about Palestinian grief, he immediately drew a connection with 9/11, which is so interesting because for me, they've always been connected. For me, 9/11, when I was still like a young man starting to travel on my own, I would hide the fact that I'm Palestinian because in my mind, I kind of subconsciously internalized that people are going to perceive me as a Palestinian as a terrorist.
I've thought for a long time that for many, many people, and this got worse after 9/11, which had nothing to do with Israel or Palestine at all, but I think the image of Arabs, Muslims, Palestinians worsened 100-fold. And Palestinian identity, which again had nothing to do with 9/11, was framed by many in the West as much of a threat as Al-Qaeda terrorists. There was little to no sympathy for what Palestinians were going through. That I think that there for a lot of people has been an ability and a willingness to view Palestinian lives as cheap, that Jewish blood is more valuable, frankly.
And really what's crazy is that we as Arabs internalize that. Even us, we keep talking about the deaths in Gaza right now in numbers, like 30,000. I hate that because it's more than 30,000. They're actual people with families. When you say 30, 40, 50, it doesn't matter. Because if you're okay with 100 dying, then the number doesn't matter. And repeating the numbers is another way of dehumanizing. But this is a result of years of propaganda that works even on us as Arabs and Palestinians. I remember like 10 years ago, I was living with my ex and we were sharing a house with a Palestinian guy. And I was obsessed with watching the show Homeland, which basically portrays Arabs as terrorists. And our Palestinian housemate would constantly ask me, why are you watching this show? Little did I know that I would constantly be paranoid walking around airports because I'm consuming shows like that.
Do you know who this man is?
No, I never met him.
And pop culture, like TV shows and movies, they're actually part of the propaganda. And if you consume stuff like that, you will perceive any Palestinian or Arab man as a terrorist. Look, I could sit here and cry to you about how sad it is that we are not perceived as equal, as us Palestinians. But if there's one thing that Gaza taught me in 2024, is that the time for begging for us to be seen as equal is over.
It's a world where some get hurt, they feel anything. What are we worth? We push it down, we push it down. Everyone wants good vibes, all our liberal friends love us when we're quiet. They all stand up, but not for us. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, blink. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, blink. Are we born to be extinct? Died from wars till they lose count.
And now, the time has come. You know what time it is, bitch.
The time has come for you to lip sync for your life.
Yes, it's time for my lip sync guest. This time I'm playing Iran Afrati, who served as a combat soldier in the Israeli military and since leaving has dedicated his life to exposing Israel's war crimes, exposing the barbaric way the Israeli military treats Palestinians. And what Iran learned, like many dissenting soldiers, is that their job, above everything else, is to instill fear in the hearts of Palestinians. That's the way to maintain the occupation. And Iran wants to tell the influencers of the world about his experiences in dehumanizing Palestinians. And he picked influences from 3 different disciplines: beauty, sports, tech, but we're gonna start with beauty. We're gonna start with Kylie. Actually, Iran already started telling her over text, when she was like, oh my God, I can't believe this stuff. Why don't you come on over?
So you wanted to talk to me?
Well, I went through 7 months of boot camp, and in the end of the 7 months, I found myself in Hebron, the only city that have a settlement in the middle of the city. So getting into the Hebron, one of the first things that I had to do was protect a Jewish holiday. So settlers throughout the West Bank and Israel could come into Hebron and celebrate. And the only way to keep them protected is to make sure that no Palestinian is leaving his home. So literally one of my first tasks was to roam the streets and make sure Palestinians understand they're going into their home and they cannot leave until the next time we're coming in. And the first time was like a movie. We birthed into the city with our guns in our hands and 6 packs of ammunition, and we're just screaming curfew. And you see the chaos. You see the people just running from place to place, closing down their shops, running home, because wherever you are when the curfew starts, this is where you're stuck. So you better be at home when we're starting to count the curfew. Now, the official orders to anyone who breaks curfew is shoot to kill. This feeling of power came as a big confusion. I think I wasn't clear if I'm enjoying the power of controlling all of these people, or if I don't understand why kids look at me frightened. Why are they running away when I'm walking into the street?
I think you have such a good heart and good energy, and to know you is to love you. So it's it is confusing.
Before my service, I work as an educator. I love kids. So I think I was very confused on why a kid will find me scary. I realize now in perspective, it got to do something with the fact that I have my 6 packs of ammunition, my 2 hand grenades, my M16 in my hand. And I think in a very rapid pace, I realized that my job is actually to maintain an apartheid system. I understood that I cannot touch a Jewish settler if he is attacking a Palestinian, but the Palestinian next to them, next house over, next building over, sometimes next apartment over, lives under my rule, and I can do whatever I want with him. I can take his home as a temporary base for a few hours to a few days to a few weeks. If we will get an order to demolish their home or just lock their front door and don't let them out into the street their house is on, a street that only Jewish settlers can walk on, and Palestinians cannot. So they have to walk through windows to yards. I think realizing all of that in a very, very early stage in my service helped me understood that someone was lying to me along the way.
I appreciate that.
I feel like for the first time in my life, the boundaries between good and bad that I learned as a kid, and obviously I learned that I'm on the good side, was broken. I felt like I am the terrorist.
It's just hard to forgive the things that you did. But I want to move on from that, you know?
Hi y'all, it's In Denial. As I always say, I'm in denial so you can wake up. And speaking of waking up to reality, I'm so happy to announce my partner for this video, my first partner ever, Ground News. In the same way I've used drag to step outside of myself and see the bigger picture, Ground News in the last couple of months has helped me step back from the news items and see the bigger picture of who's behind these news items. Who's funding the media? How impartial are they? This is Ground News' main page, where you can see top stories from the day. Let's click on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and select the story about Israel blocking aid, since we're talking about Palestinian suffering. You'll be taken to the newsroom. On the right, you'll see data on how the story is being covered by the media. On the left, you'll see all the articles related to the topic. As you scroll down on the right, you'll see which news sources are reporting on the topic and where they fall on the political spectrum. If you scroll further down, you'll see the ownership breakdown for sources reporting on the story. And then if you scroll further down, you'll see the factuality rating. This is not a fact check on the specific article, but an assessment of the overall reporting practices of the news outlet conducted by third-party monitoring organizations. Moving over to the left is where you can see my favorite feature, the article comparison feature. You can sort out the articles by location, factuality, or whether the article is behind a paywall. Basically, Ground News has been like this mommy figure in the last month for me, helping me analyze the media that I'm consuming. And if you're anything like me, then you're probably obsessed with separating truth from propaganda. So go to ground.news/indie and subscribe for $1 a month or 40% off their unlimited access Vantage plan. It's linked in the description and it's the pinned comment. Now, speaking of people who support indie and believe in indie, I really want to thank the people who donated to the last few videos and all the new members. Love ya, girl. And one more thing before we go back to the portrayal of Palestinian grief. I want to quickly plug my upcoming show on April 17. This is the last performance I do of the show all about me and my mother, and it's going to be filmed for YouTube. So I'm going to be bringing it. Tickets linked below. Now let's go back to Palestinian grief, the unprocessed Palestinian grief. I'm gonna play a little clip that haunts my soul even though there's nothing visibly violent about it. The boy speaks very calmly and actually that's what's chilling about it.
أمي كانت حامل لما إحنا رحنا على المدرسة خشوا بالصالون طخوا أمي ببطنها كانت حامل بالشهر السابع.
وأبوك وين كان؟
أبوي كان نايم.
ولما صحي؟
هو مات هو وامي باسبوع هما الاثنين اسبوع واحد.
قدامك انت شفت؟
قدامي.
شو شفت؟ شو صار قدامك؟
طلعوهم على الممر وطخوهم قدامي.
طب شو اكثر شيء بخوفك؟
اني ارجع على بلدي ما الاقيش اهلي. اروح لا الاقي ابو لا الاقي ام لا الاقي اخوه. ما الاقيش سند في هالدنيا.
And another one that tore my heart is the story of this teenage boy who suddenly finds himself playing father and mother to his baby sister because the parents were killed.
أنا اللي بلبسها، أنا بحصلها على الحليب والبامباز، يعني أنا اللي بعينهم وأنا اللي يعني بربيها هذه أختي الصغيرة. إذا كان معايا يعني مصاري بروح أشتري لها حليب أو يعني حدا بعت لنا حليب ولما يخلص من عندها بضطر أشتري لها يعني في الليل بسكوت.
Aaron Bushnell, Habibi, can I go up there? It's a complete shit show down here. What? He's so funny. Aaron thinks that after he set himself on fire, that things changed and the people rose up. No, Habibi, it's still the same. It's even worse. Huh? No, seriously, nothing changed. They even call you mentally ill, bitch. But seriously, like, I'm making jokes, I'm clowning around, sorry, like, if it's not appropriate, but for me, it's the only way to cope. It's like, because it's too much almost. Like, when I watch these clips, I mean, I've watched them so many times as I edit this, and everything that I include, I have to watch many times, to the point where, I don't know if it's good or bad, but I become desensitized to it, which is another way to cope, I guess. But the first time I watched all these clips, it's almost like I'm crying on behalf of them because they can't cry. And that's exactly it, because they're so close to the ongoing trauma, they can't afford to cry. This is what we feel like when we're in the middle of trauma. We can cry about stuff and have our heart become soft and melt when there's enough distance, when there's enough time. And maybe that's why, as a Palestinian in the diaspora, or any person who's outside who has empathy, can grieve from a distance. I actually had an interesting exchange with Muna about this.
I want to talk about our point of view, if it's even valid or important. Yani, it's the diaspora Palestinians.
Yeah. It's funny how you started it with saying, like, if it's even important or relevant, because I think one thing that we all have in common, the Palestinians in diaspora, is survivor's guilt. Like, why do I get to have a safe life, and for us to be able to sit here now and have this conversation without bombs?
Like me, when I wasn't raised in Palestine. She was born in Lebanon and moved around and settled in Jordan and now lives in Dubai. Like me, she always thought that Palestinians in Palestine are in constant pain. That is until she met her husband, who was born and raised in Palestine. And when she started visiting Palestine after she married him, she started to see that it's actually different.
I started understanding how they were feeling under the occupation. So he was part of the people who were in the Intifada. He was 18 years old at the time when the Intifada happened. And when he shares the stories, he said, yeah, and then we went and played cards. And I'm like, what? You played cards during the Intifada? And he said, yeah, and we watched movies and we read books.
I shared that naivete. Like, I understand where that comes from. And that's why I'm so scared to go visit Palestine. But actually talking to Mana and hearing about her trips to Palestine really encouraged me and made me think, like, maybe one day I want to go.
I find that they are lighter than me. When I went to Jerusalem and we're crossing, you know, and there's Zionists everywhere, I'm like so tense and I'm like ready to go fight. And his cousins who have lived there all their lives are like light-hearted about it.
From the outside, maybe it's even harder because your imagination can run wild as to how horrible it is.
Yeah. I wouldn't ever say that it's harder for me than anyone living under this occupation. I just have so much respect. Many of them humiliated, treated unfairly, and for them to be able to laugh and smile and make music and make art.
What's hiding in the clouds hanging over my head? My dad risks his life outside to buy bread. The fourth war in my 12th year. There's nothing I can do in this case to stay safe. I'm brave, even though this house could be in my grave. I want freedom for the population.
I sometimes think that if the world truly sees all those feelings inside Palestinians, the depth of Palestinian feeling and pain and creativity and art and love for life, none of this horror would be allowed to go on. Because if you saw Palestinians as human beings, saw all these sides of them, you would not accept that this happens. But there's so many who refuse or are incapable of seeing Palestinian grief. People who are normally like progressive and liberal and good people. You know, there's this term called progressive except for Palestine. It's PEP. Yeah, that's a thing. And I got first-hand experience in that on my last trip to Dubai with one of my friends, one of my dear friends. This guy, I'm still tormented about the conversation that we had because let me tell you a little backstory. This guy, I met him at a dog shelter where we both used to volunteer. He spends his time rescuing dogs. And by the way, he doesn't have Instagram. He doesn't do it to post on social media. He just loves helping. And he's the kind of friend that can sense if you're in trouble. You don't even have to ask. Like the amount of times that he's just sensed that I'm broke or struggling and he would just lend me money without me even having to ask. This is the kind of person he is. So you can see where this is going, I can imagine. So when I brought up Palestine to him, he was like, oh, but Islamic terrorism. Oh, but jihad. I was too stunned to answer. I couldn't believe those words were coming out of his mouth. But what's very relevant to mention here is that my friend comes from India. Not that all Indian people think this way, but India is one of the many countries that buys the tools of surveillance and occupation from Israel and uses it to oppress the Muslim minorities in their countries. Myanmar is another country that buys from Israel. And Anthony Lowenstein actually wrote about that.
The Indian government and many, many Indians who are able to, blindly accept a worldview which says that any
Muslim, basically.
Any Muslim is essentially a potential threat, and that fits very clearly with what Israel is doing. So the sympathy that many Indians now have for Israel, I think, only can occur if you do not see Palestinians suffering, if you don't think that they're deserving to survive. So yeah, I would just say to your Indian friend, mate, you, as in what you are supporting is making all of us more unsafe, including you in India.
Because to be honest, I'm still kind of like tormented by the way that my friend, because I haven't been able to talk to him ever since I left Dubai because I was so stunned by that conversation. I couldn't believe he was talking to me about terrorism when he knows that my father was kicked out of Palestine way before Islamic terrorism was a thing. But I want to thank Anthony really for clarifying some things for me and for the reminder that Palestinian suffering, the reason why Palestinian suffering resonates with so many around the world is because they see themselves in that dehumanization that Palestinians go through. And speaking of dehumanization, let's go back to that specific tactic that I mentioned earlier, the weaponization of Western feminism against Palestinian men. They do it in a subtle, or what they think is a subtle way. Like a few weeks back, Talk TV host Julia Hartley-Brewer interviewed Palestinian parliamentarian Dr. Mustafa Barghouti. Throughout the segment, she continuously shouted at him as he spoke about Israel's relentless war on Gaza.
Whenever I speak about Palestinian rights, or Palestinian situation, you claim it is history. I'm talking about what's happening today.
No, I know, and
this is not history.
I understand that. Please don't say that again. We don't have time for it. You've made that point 5 times already.
I don't know what you have time for.
Oh my God, for the love of God, let me finish a sentence, man. Maybe you're not used to women talking. I don't know, but I'd like to finish a sentence, sir.
Even though he was the epitome of class and respect, he never cut her off, and he wasn't being misogynistic towards her. He was just listing Israel's crimes. And she was hysterical almost in how she kept accusing him of being a misogynist because she wants to distract from what he's talking about Israel. But the best part of that interview is towards the end, where she thought she was going to corner him, when she was like, you have 20 seconds to speak. And he gave her the biggest mic drop. He didn't even need 20 seconds. He used 5.
I've got 20 seconds left. I'm not even going to bother trying to answer. If you don't think Israel's reaction is acceptable, what would have been an acceptable reaction to you? You've got 10 seconds left.
To end occupation and allow peace to prevail for both people.
That's their react. Brilliant. Yeah. Sorry to have, been a woman speaking.
Sorry, I'm a woman. What does that have to do with anything, bitch? This is a tactic that apologists for Israel always use. Either this, woke washing about women, or pink washing.
For the love of God, let me finish a sentence, man.
After that interview, what do you feel when you go home?
She was reflecting an Orientalist white supremacist view of Arabs, Palestinians. I think she also showed that she was absolutely arrogant and unprepared, because had she done a little bit of research, she would have discovered 2 things. First of all, I am one of the most prominent leaders struggling for women's rights in everything I did, whether in political life or medical work. But the second point, my wife is one of the most known women struggling for women's rights, and she is a well-known researcher. She's the most published researcher in Palestine.
But this depiction of Arabic men as beasts is the first step in the erasure of their pain and suffering. And what's incredible about the portrayal of Palestinian men as beasts by these so-called feminists is that how you can call yourself a feminist when you're excusing genocide, in which many women, mothers, are dying. What kind of feminism is that? Again, PEP, progressive except for Palestine, which means you're not progressive at all. You're a hypocrite.
לוזרים, מסריחים, עם כפכפים, באים דוחים, באמת, אשכרה דוחים. רצחו איזה חלק הומניטרי במוח, חמלה שהיא גורפת כזאת. כולנו בני אדם. לא, לא. השמאלני שלי, so called.
הוא עוד קיים?
לא. הוא קיים בדברים אחרים, אני בן אדם הומני, אבל הוא לא קיים ככה.
Speaking of fake feminism, do you remember that article, the New York Times article, that shaped the way the whole world sees this conflict? See that part in the headline? How Hamas weaponized violence. How you weaponized violence. Because by the way, Not only have the stories been debunked, but this is not the first time in history when accusations of sexual have been used to demonize people and justify atrocities done against them.
If you look at lynchings in the American context, from the end of slavery to World War II, it was not killing that white people accused black people of. It was
that's
because
right.
They need to find something that is so egregious that and was the most common accusation leveled against a black person for these lynchings.
Anyway, that New York Times article was written by Nat Schwartz, who had no prior reporting experience, but instead worked as Air Force intelligence for the IDF.
There's no doubt that the New York Times and the New Yorker and many of American media for years, as I've often said, have really been water carriers for Israel. I mean, you often have editors openly talking about that. I mean, the idea, for example, that you've had, I think it's about 4 or 5 New York Times bureau chiefs in Jerusalem whose children at that time were serving in the IDF.
Can you imagine what the equivalent of that would be for Palestinians? Like the father of one of the Hamas fighters working for the New York Times?
I mean, the disaster here is the fact that they don't even see it as a problem.
They don't see it as a problem.
Yeah.
They don't, because the world that many of these people live in, it's not always necessarily just pro-Israel, though that's obviously part of it. It's pro-Zionist environment. I think also for some journalists and editors, and I would argue politicians, you realise pretty early on that if you want to go far in certain professions, if you're going to be very pro-Palestine, or for that matter pro-Arab or pro-Muslim really, you're going to find it pretty hard.
And the way that then translates into mainstream Western media is that the Palestinian narrative, the Palestinian truth-telling, our attempts to document these crimes is buried under the rubble and the debris of smear campaigns of anti-Semitism. Very aggressive and orchestrated lobby efforts to censor, to sack pro-Palestinian journalists, to have a system in the media where those journalists who signed an open letter calling for fairer reporting are not allowed to report or write about Palestine and Israel. Whereas those who have actually taken trips to Israel, funded by Israeli lobby groups, are openly reporting.
And it's really hard not to internalize stuff like that for Palestinians themselves. Have you heard of DJ Khaled, by the way? This guy who's been painfully silent. A Palestinian guy, rapper, musician, whatever the fuck he is. Like, he's said nothing.
We are all people and everybody can do what they can do. But when I watch you have grown men carry you, so you don't your Jordans. We're used to Palestinians being carried. They're just not alive, they're dead. And they don't have shoes, they don't even have feet. And so, to me, you have gone from DJ Khaled to DJ Callis. You cannot be so oblivious.
Really, as a Palestinian, to ignore this, you'd have to make a very conscious choice to pick your money over having any kind of empathy. A very conscious decision not to look at the very profound grief of your people.
Hey everyone, this is Sam from Gaza. I'm still alive. And I'm good. If I continued walking like this, I'll reach Gaza City, my city, my home, that I was forced to leave 4 months ago. I'm so angry because I cannot just continue walking like this to my home. I have a lot of, I don't know the feeling. It's like قهر. أنا كثير مقهورة. Like, look at this. Look at what are we documenting now. More and more people are now just coming to the south, where 2 million people of us are waiting to die. It's the 24th of February.
If you're watching this video, you probably know that was Bisan. That's one of the last few standing journalists on the ground still in Gaza. And what I love about Bisan, unlike the others who haven't processed their grief, she lets herself feel it all. Millions of people around the world are fans of Bisan, and we feel like we know her.
And I feel she's also grown so much over the past few months, and I wish she didn't have to. She's also so young and so lovely, and like grief, silly as it may seem, but I know what it's like to have curly hair. I know that she's struggling. Of course, she doesn't have products. You need a lot of water. You need like all of it. She had to cut her hair last month, and I was so sad to see that video of her hair. So there's grief of losing a loved one and like horrific pain, but there's also like, I miss my shower. I miss watching TV. I miss smoking a cigarette on my balcony.
جبنا طحينة وجبنا طحين جبنا طحينة وجبنا طحين على الشمال على الشمال.
Speaking of flour and food, now it's like a normal thing that maybe if fathers or mothers go out to get flour, when they come back, either their family is like dead or they die while trying to get food. Like that's a thing that just happens. So imagine how awful it is that on top of all these tiny little griefs, you have these immense, huge types of griefs, like losing your loved ones. Like there's this clip of this boy who won't let go of his dead mother.
I heard the mother the other day say, sometimes I wish I didn't have this baby, as she rocked her on her knee. So these are the things that keep playing in my mind.
ايش اكثر شيء بتفكري فيه؟
الموت.
Another type of grief that's being experienced by Palestinians right now is the grief of separation. Because now they're all doing these impossible choices of, I can leave Gaza with my kids, but I have to leave my parents behind. Or I can send my parents and I stay behind. Because it's so expensive.
أنا كثير زعلان لأني تارك بلدي وتارك بيتي. ولكن أنا اخترت الأمان.
هلا وين احنا اليوم؟
Speaking of those who get out, don't think for a second that their journey is easy. Because that's when the healing and processing the grief will start, which is already a very painful process that will take years, if not decades.
I just want to lend a little perspective to this that may help people understand in a different way. First of all, I'm not Palestinian, and there's no way that I can fully understand what these people have gone through, the trauma and the atrocities. I mean, I can't understand it, okay? But I've given up my life, and I moved here to Egypt 5 months ago, and I work with these people every day. Any Palestinian that has gone through this is suffering from massive PTSD, okay? And when we see these people come in, they are in absolute shock. They're actually more comfortable getting bombed in Gaza than they are here, living in an apartment in Egypt and having, going to the grocery store and getting to pick whatever food they want and having new clothes and having a toothbrush to brush their teeth. I mean, this is like mind-blowing to them because they've been through so much torture that oftentimes, just like most of us, it's easier to return to your trauma than live in the healthy world, okay? And so I want to tell you a story the other day that happened. One of these displaced Palestinians was so proud of themselves because after 3 to 4 days here, they finally managed to take an Uber by themselves across town. I mean, these people cannot function doing normal things because they are in such trauma.
And speaking of Americans who know what's really going on, this one goes out to you.
Oh, Biden, Biden, you people want you to know that you are fucking up here. Oh, Biden, Biden, you're criminal and it shows. No re-election this year, screw you and your good friend baby. While we're at it, fuck you PM soon, I'll get Trudeau. Your cowardice is cringeworthy, you lying terrorists. You're killing babies just for greed. Hands off of Yemen, they have a spine. You should resign. We all stand with Palestine.
But not all Americans know about Palestinian grief and who's causing it. Which brings us back to our lip-sync guest, the ex-Israeli soldier Iran, who's here to spread the words to Americans who don't know. Americans like Travis, whom I love, by the way. I think he's super cute, and his representation here is not that we're shaming him, but there are many people who don't know, and who should know.
In the age of 15, 16, I began being almost obsessed with trying to understand the Nazi side in the Holocaust. To try to understand how can a Nazi soldier get up in the morning, give his kids a kiss, his wife a hug, and go out to the camps and do his job. I just couldn't understand it. And when I got into the occupied territories, for the first time I understood how can there be a contradiction inside yourself. as a human being, you could do your job and be a one person at home, be a loving, caring, boyfriend or a son or a brother, and in the same time hold people under a regime so oppressed that people are dying not from only your bullets, from depression or sickness. I don't want to live in an only Jewish state that values Jewish life on every other life.
Nope.
I want my kids to grow up in a place when they don't have to oppress anyone.
In the beginning, Iran, the ex-soldier, he thought that what he went through were just his personal experiences and not something that happens on a wide scale. But after he left the IDF and started interviewing soldiers, he realized that the oppression of Palestinians in the occupied territories is in fact systemic. And that's very hard for people outside Israel, especially people in the US, although it's changing now, but it's still hard for a lot of people to not only see but accept that Israel can be this cruel. And that's what Travis here represents for me. Perfectly sweet, nice, well-meaning people who just don't know.
You had to have at least one part where you're like, all right, that was kind of cool.
In my previous role as a researcher into the Israeli military, I was taking testimonies from many soldiers. And one of the soldiers is a soldier from a semi-elite unit called in Hebrew Duvdevan. And he's telling me a story about how he's serving after this new rule from the Supreme Court. And they cannot do targeting and killing anymore. And how their officer is gathering the unit together and telling them, we're going to go out tonight to capture this person. Is highly dangerous. What we're going to do is we're going to come in 5 or 6 people's unit into their home in the middle of the night, break in quietly, go up to his bedroom and point a gun into his head. Now, if he just wake up and surrender, we're taking him into the base. But if he scream, you shoot him in the head. If he lift his blanket, you shoot him in the head. Now, because we understand as rational human beings that no human being can wake up in the middle of the night with a gun into his head and not scream or move, we understand these orders as an execution orders that bypass the Supreme Court order. And even the official rules of not executing human beings are going off the window.
ממקום למקום, מחלקים את הנשקים האלה, נשק מציל חיים. היום זכינו להיות בעיר אשקלון של תומר גלם יקירי, כיתת כוננות שנייה.
If you see a girl with scissors next to you, you shoot to kill. Executions are very much alive in the Israeli military, the Israeli police, the Israeli discourse.
Can you imagine reaching a point where you find it okay to arrest a child? This is not something that happens overnight. You need to be taught how not to understand Palestinians.
להבין את הצד השני, הפלסטינים.
אי אפשר להבין את הצד הפלסטיני משום שצד שהמטרה המוצהרת שלו היא להרוג אותך.
And the explanation when it's given is that they are just they're primitive, they're stupid, they're lazy, what I mean? In Hebrew, the way to say that something is poorly done is to say Arab labor. Whereas, the most magnificent homes that Israelis live in today are Palestinian homes that they stole. But never mind, you don't want to ruin a good story with the facts. So that is the reality, you grow up in it, it is everywhere. And where do you see Palestinians as an Israeli? You see them collecting the trash, you see them doing the landscape, working in the gardens, you see them cleaning the streets, and you hear about them as terrorists. You never hear that there's a Palestinian writer or poet or philosopher or mathematician or scientist or doctor. We're never told that we actually stole the riches of this country, that we stole entire cities that were built, that we stole, agriculture, produce, and fertile lands.
This whole idea is to create an ethnically cleansed piece of land only for Jewish people, with Palestinian workers. Of course, some Palestinians can stay and do stuff for us, but this is our land.
And you might be wondering why I put Travis as taking off his headphones there. That's not because he found it too much. Well, maybe you can interpret it as He found it too much. These stories are way too painful. But I like to look at it as that he was on his phone fact-checking what Iran was telling him. And he came to the conclusion that Iran wasn't lying. And just to make sure that we seal the deal for Travis, here's a song dedication. One of Taylor's songs.
Nice to meet you where you've been. I can show you some terrible things. Illegal weapons, burning skin. Look at this and you think, oh my God, look at that state. All the folks they've displaced. They want bombs, so we pay. Hey. Your money funding crimes all over the Middle East. Ain't it funny how they lie? You know they don't care about you, so hey, let's be friends. Fight like hell till this shit ends. Grab your bullhorn and take my hand. We can make the bad guys scared on the weekend. This ain't gonna be forever. Occupation's going down in flames. Cause one day when this is over, they're gonna hang their heads in shame. Colonizing motherfuckers will say that we're to blame.
And it's true, Palestinians are always to blame for the situation they find themselves in. It was incredible. Like my last video that I did, the one with the Oscar speech, it's crazy. I did not expect any backlash for that. The one I did about the propaganda, I was ready, prepared to get some hate because, you know, if you're going to tell people they're indoctrinated, it's not like they're going to be like, oh, thanks for pointing it out. It's like when you tell someone they're dating someone who abuses them and lies to them. You're like, they're not going to be, oh, thank you. Now I know. No, people will get very defensive around stuff like that. So when I made that video about propaganda, I was expecting it, ready for the hate. But when I made that Oscar video, I was literally not talking about Israel, just talking about Palestinian pain. Children, how they're afraid, alone, without their parents. Even the images, none of them were violent. It was the most tender video I've ever done. And the kind of backlash and the hateful comments that I got from Zionists who were like, they brought this on themselves. These kids, their parents voted for Hamas and such, like, this is what you get when you mess with God's army. Girl, no. But this kind of, they brought it on themselves, like they deserve to be erased, they deserve to be wiped out. This points to a bigger issue on what's happening with Palestinians, like how Israel treats Palestinians, is there's a complete erasure of Palestine.
احنا الآن في خان يونس راح أفرجيكم حجم الدمار. شوف حجم دمار ما فيش خان يونس.
It's not just the name Palestine, it's not just the four colors, green, black, red, and white. It's everything about Palestinian identity and Palestinian culture and Palestinian history. In the past 5 months, the Israeli military has obliterated every single historical and archaeological site in Gaza. Wow. They've demolished the Gaza Municipal Archives. They destroyed Salim al-Rais's antique shop, which I had the fortune and privilege of being able to visit very recently, which as far as I know...
You were in Gaza weeks before October 7th, right?
That's right.
Wow.
And bought about 600 documents off of him, which, as far as I can tell, the largest private collection of documents related to Palestinian history and all of historic Palestine was obliterated by the Israeli military. They're trying to erase everything.
Israel have introduced scholicide, which is the eradicating and determination to kill scholars, academics. We have medicocide or health side, where Israel is dedicated to kill Palestinians who are working in the medical field, the professionals, the senior professionals. This actually is not new. Israel have always been since 1948, when they have been attacking the villages, they always started with the medics and the paramedics and the nurses to make sure that whoever they would kill or injure wouldn't have the ability to be treated. So everyone's already killed now or a little bit later.
But for me, the worst kind of erasure is the erasure of someone's pain. But you can never erase the pain of Palestinians. You can never erase us. The world is waking up. And thanks in no small part to our Jewish brothers and sisters who are really standing up for Palestine. And if you've been following my series on Palestine, you know I always lip sync to Jewish voices, right? Because it reminds me that actually the problem never was and never will be Judaism. It's Zionism that's the problem. And what I find really relatable and moving about those Jewish voices that stand up for Palestine is the motivation behind their activism. What drives them? There's a pain that's very recognizable. And it really came up when I was asking Anthony about what's his saddest memory in Gaza or all of Palestine.
I mean, the thing that stays with me, which in some ways motivates me, is, again, not a particular incident, is shame. Shame that this is being done in my name. And the shame that I regularly felt in Palestine, seeing Israel, I'm not an Israeli citizen, just to be clear, but seeing Israeli soldiers, police, humiliating Palestinians. Literally, we lived in East Jerusalem for years, and literally every day, down the road from my house, I saw Israeli police humiliating Palestinian kids because they could. Because they could. Frisking them for no reason. Making them sit on the side of the road for a while for no reason. In other words, this is what the occupation has done. It morally corrupts you as a society. It cannot do anything else. And this is what's happened to Israel. It's morally corrupted the society to its core.
And speaking of how the occupation can corrupt, let's hear from someone who can tell us about that from first-hand experience. Let's go back to Iran. He now wants to direct his message to Elon Musk. When I was thinking of influencers for this video, I wanted a world leader, someone beyond the beauty and the sports. So naturally, I started thinking of politicians. But then I remembered how morally depraved they are. They would never care to investigate someone else's grief or putting themselves in the shoes of someone else as far as feelings and pain is concerned. So I thought, let me shift focus to someone else who's a big player on the world stage, but actually has a soul. And by the way, this was around the time that I saw this clip of the robots that are going to be deployed to kill Palestinians. Yes, girl, let the Squid Games begin. So I thought, okay, maybe someone from tech. And this was also the same week that I heard that Elon put a chip in someone's brain. So I was like, okay, let's speak to Elon. And I actually really like the guy. So anyway, I pulled my green screen and teleported myself to Elon.
Ignorance is perhaps, in my view, the real enemy to be countered.
You know, of course, it's not surprising. Israel is selling this idea of the soldiers are more important than anything. Not only that we will oppress Palestinians and will do whatever we want, but in a very specific way saying, don't confuse us with the idea of moral or right or wrong. Whatever soldiers do in the occupied territories are right.
But all creatures fight. I mean, the jungle is you look at people think of this nature as perhaps some sort of peaceful thing.
I think the system is not only inside the military. That's actually what being an Israeli means. Being an Israeli growing up, you understand that all the Arabs hate you, that they're actually in a way the continuation of Hitler. I mean, going into the military, you're already going so full of hate.
Yes.
And later on, when you're going into your service, when you do not see human beings in front of you. Do not believe their sorrow, do not believe their smiles, do not believe their feelings. They are subhuman.
But I mean, this is one of the most contentious subjects one could possibly discuss.
And this is a common reaction from people on the outside about this conflict. They tell you, oh, these are just two sides who hate each other equally and are equally to blame. And the danger with that way of thinking, however well-meaning it is its failure to recognize the real pain of Palestinians, that their pain is not valued.
You describe what is the reality for Palestinians here.
A life of people who dream about freedom and don't see it.
Israel as a state like to use the idea that Palestinians only understand force or power. But the truth of the matter is that Israelis only understand power.
Whether we liked it or not, we control the life of millions. We Israelis, we shall have security only when they will have hope.
Yeah.
Every other attempt from Palestinians to try to negotiate this situation in a diplomatic way was countered by more attacks, more oppression, and more occupation, more stealing of the land, more destroying of homes, more settlements being built.
You are stealing my house.
And if I don't steal it, someone else is going to steal it.
No one is allowed to steal it, يا عمي. Jacob, you know this is not your house.
Yes, but if I go, you don't go back. So what's the problem? Why are you yelling at me? I didn't do this.
Can you imagine what it must be like for someone to steal your home, then frame you as a terrorist for resisting?
We decided to call going into the UN a diplomatic terrorism.
Yeah.
and to go into the ICC, international terrorism. We basically describe every form of resistance as terrorism, because the sole idea of the occupation is not to be safe.
The hell's the point of that?
What people maybe don't understand is that Israel is creating the situation of constantly having to protect yourself, creating this situation by oppressing millions of people until they have no other choice but resist. So many of these people lost a family member, had been to prison or lost someone in prison, and understood that nothing could be changed.
So really the question is like, for every Hamas member that you kill, how many did you create?
You cannot deter a person or a group of people if they believe that they have nothing to lose.
Because the truth is that Israel do not hear the diplomacy.
So are you saying Benjamin Netanyahu deliberately boosted Hamas to try to prevent a Palestinian state?
Yeah, sure. He deliberately and systematically even told, is on record, whoever wants to avoid the threat of a two-state solution has to support my policy of paying protection money to the Hamas.
So what we did, with the permission of our Prime Minister, is to let Qatar to transfer a huge amount of money in cash.
Counterintuitive thing here. I think that the thing that I think should be done, even though it is very difficult, I would recommend that Israel engage in the most conspicuous acts of kindness possible.
I do not believe that Israel would change on its own. At no point in history there was a state or a power that had the power to control over other human beings and benefit from it, and just decided to let go of this power by its own. It was always forced on them by the resistance of the people underneath them or the intervention of other forces around the world. And I do believe that the rest of the world have to interfere in what's going on in Palestine. There's nothing else that we can do except for giving all the Palestinians equal rights and starting a new state, a new equality system for all human beings on the ground.
You see all those walls they built, we're gonna bring them tumbling down. We ain't gonna give up the fight, our liberation's bound. They don't let journalists in, but we got social media now, showing everybody what they do. It's clear beyond a doubt, the world has been awakened to the patterns I need breaking. It's the risk that we're taking. We ain't ever gonna shut our mouths. It's everywhere in Gaza now. They're surrounded by so much pain. Baby, this ain't how defense goes. This shit is inhumane. This genocide is not a war, but a martyrs don't die in vain. Baby, this ain't how the rest goes. We're gonna see a brand new day.
Palestine and Gaza is really freeing so many people around the world. And I can talk from my first-hand experience about how it's freeing me to get in touch with who I really am and strip away this shame that I had about my Arabic or Palestinian identity, which I'm ashamed to even have had that kind of shame. But anyway, and actually Gaza has freed me from the fears that I have. Because when I look at what they put up with, the resilience they have, the faith they have in the face of that much terror, makes me think, like, what am I afraid of? If I go there, like, will I get interrogated or maybe worse? But the point is, it's taking away my fears. And actually, Anthony, when I was talking with him, he asked me a question about would I want to go to Palestine.
And have you been to Palestine?
No, I will.
Yeah. I mean, you'd like to go?
Yes.
You feel mixed about it
scared.
by the sounds of it. You're
I'm
scared. I say go. You got to see it. You got to see it. It's going to make you angry. I mean, obviously, you're going to say you're angry about it already. I mean, as am I. Obviously, my background's very different to yours, but...
I just went silent for a second because I have this longing. I want to visit so bad.
You know, up until October 7th happened, I, in my core, believed that Palestine was going to be free, but really not anytime soon. I thought maybe another 50, 100 years.
Yeah.
But now, like anytime I think of Palestine, it's no longer so far away. It feels like it's within reach. And if not in my lifetime, then definitely in my daughter's lifetime.
شو أكتر شي تحب تاكله؟
همبونجر.
همبونجر؟ أحلى همبونجر هلقيت بدنا نعمل همبونجر. شو كمان؟ شو غير الهمبونجر؟
كباب.
كباب؟ بدنا نعمل كباب. شو كمان؟
بيتزا.